I don't necessarily know where to start with this one. I scooped Momodora Reverie Under the Moonlight on a Steam sale, and when I did a little digging, not only did I discover it was part of a series, but it was also the prequel to the original Momodora. Momodora Classic, as demonstrated from the visuals, drew a lot of inspiration from another indie game called Cave Story, with its aesthetics and Mega Man for its gameplay. Each iteration tweaks and slightly improves on its core concepts in what will later be carried over into Reverie Under the Moonlight. I know, surprise, surprise, right? Momodora 1 and 2 are free to download and play on the creator's website, with the third being on Steam for $2 if that sounds interesting to you. They're not long games, mind you. The developer created what can only refer to as this trilogy of games to be that classic NES arcade style, so if you got some time to kill, just pop one in. Oh, where are my manners? This is Lolliber, and welcome to my review of Momodora, Reverie Under the Moonlight. The first thing that is clear is that visually it is quite the improvement over the previous entries. It's not the most gorgeous pixel art I've ever seen, but it's certainly pretty damn good. I love the design for the main character and the NPCs you can interact with. However, some of the enemies you encounter are definitely a little flat. Oh, and the environments? Yes, so good. What is Momodora about? Well, you play the priestess Kaho, who comes from a faraway land to try and save her home from a curse that has been plaguing it. Armed with nothing but a bow, a holy leaf, and special garments with great significance later on, your goal is to seek an audience with the Queen of to possibly save your hometown. And that's roughly about it. There isn't that much given in the way of dialogue or cutscenes that explains in detail about this land and its inhabitants, leaving you to have to fill in the blanks for yourself with implied dialogue and item descriptions. Sound familiar? It's a lot like the Souls series, which is an apt description to define this game's new inspiration. There's a good amount of parallels you can draw between the two, from its darker aesthetics to its uses of items and difficulty of tasks it presents. Keep in mind, this is all framed in a Metroidvania genre as well, using a fairly large map for you to explore and backtrack through once you have collected the proper item/upgrade to progress, with goodies to find in all the nooks and crannies. As one would expect, the core of the gameplay reflects this change in inspiration as well, moving from the snappy twitch play to a slower, more methodical approach to traversing your surroundings, of which is very reminiscent of the Souls series. However, I don't think this attempt to convert the Dark Souls into a 2D plane is the most smoothest transition between the two. There was no egregious moment that had me snapping my controller, thankfully, but there were certainly some that were a test of patience. So one of the things that is introduced in this game is the ability to dodge roll, which does come in handy a fair amount of the time, but fuck me, half the time I end up just rolling into enemies, which hurts because for some reason the developers decided to keep the enemy hitboxes that you usually find in a 2D platform heavy game. Not only that, but at the beginning of the game, it's rather unforgiving in its difficulty. Within the first area of the game, it already starts throwing poison effects at you, and you only start with 3 healing items that will at best heal 1 full bar of your HP. Not only that, but the next area of the game starts doling out some hefty punches in its enemies if you're not careful. To top it off, the checkpoint/save system shares a lot of similarities with the Souls series, refreshing all of your usable items when you strike a prey at the bell. However, unlike in Dark Souls, when you die, you don't respawn at the last checkpoint. It's considered an actual game over, which means Any items you collected or bosses you defeated before reaching the next checkpoint is entirely lost. It never gets too bad, mind you, aside from the final stretch between the 2 last checkpoints. The rest are rather well placed if you play carefully. After all, Momodora is one of those games that never truly ramps up its difficulty, which means once you get used to all of its quirks, it becomes a rather fun experience to deal with the game's challenges. Find a particular area frustrating to deal with? Don't worry about it, because chances are you won't be running into the same challenge twice. Momodora is not a very long game, only taking me roughly 3 hours to complete it on the medium setting, which means the game likes to explore a lot of little mini puzzles between what is most definitely the best part of the game, the bosses. Some are easy to cheese, while others are presented well, striking a nice difficulty while overtaking the boss. Then there's the Pardoner finale, which is, without a shadow of the doubt, the highlight of what this game has to offer. It's so well constructed. This boss is aggressive enough to keep you on your toes, and from just sitting in a corner cheesing it, transforming the fight into more of a lethally fun dance that really brings the simplicity of the controls out. Yeah, gameplay. Maybe I should have talked about it first. Oh well, live and let live. The equipment you start with at the beginning of the game is essentially all you get in the way of the core experience, so essentially you don't get any new weapons to tinker with. Don't take that as a bad thing though. As stated before, it's not a long game, and the developers did a good job tailoring the experience to only using a bow that you can charge for more damage, as well as a leaf with a 3-part combo and jump attack. And to completely contradict myself 1 second later, that isn't necessarily true that they are the only thing in your arsenal. You do collect a random assortment of items throughout the game as well, finding them in chests or buying them off the merchant with currency that drops off slain enemies. They come in 2 varieties, actives and passives. Actives are probably my least favorite of the 2 to use. These items share the same slot as your healing items, and you can only have one selected at a time through a one-way rotary like Dark Souls, meaning you will be clumsily fumbling through items in combat, or outside of it too. Plus, a fair amount of them are, not the most effective. There are a fair bit of good ones, though, that help make short work of bosses, but that's just not the same as passives. Oh boy, are some of them broken. You can only equip 2 at a time as a trade-off, but a lot of them are so useful, especially when you start mixing and matching and start to create some ridiculous synergies. For beginners, I recommend the Ring of Candor, which will make a sound whenever you walk into a room with a secret collectible, if you don't want to use a guide as reference. And as an added little treat, try taking down bosses without taking a hit. You just might get some neat things from doing so. And last, but certainly not the least, is the soundscape. A lot of the sounds are in that compressed retro style reminiscent of the SNES that does a good job conveying the sense of the game. Attacks have that satisfying heft to them, and cues for enemies' attacks are fairly distinct, though sometimes they can be drowned out by the soundtrack. Just all around good work. Mostly. And that soundtrack. Oh yes. It is damn good, if a bit jarring since it's higher quality sound than the rest. It really hits that sweet spot I have for the low, moody, or atmospheric music with a few higher energetic songs for the boss fights. I do recommend buying the soundtrack with the game. Hats off to Notorious Knave who created it. The entire soundtrack can be found on YouTube easily if you want to give it a listen to before buying. It's only $2 extra to purchase with the game. So would I say Momodora is worth the price? $10 is kind of stretching it for how short it is, even if the game hosts a New Game Plus feature. But the overall quality it packs, I would say, is worth it enough. Give this little vignette a try, as it will not leave you disappointed.